I mean, we could pull that.
Yours is down here, Sherry.
Thank you.
I'm pretty sure it's set.
I did put the temperature because it was like 16.
Balmy summer day, that's right.
Let's call the Planning Commission hearing for the City of San Clemente of Wednesday, October 17th to order. Jen, would you do the Pledge of Allegiance for us?
Sure, thank you. Would you rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Can we have roll call, please?
Commissioner Brown? He's absent. Commissioner Kuczynski?
Here.
Commissioner Talley?
Here.
Commissioner Wu?
Here.
Chair Pro Tem Blackwell?
Here.
Vice Chair Rulin?
Here.
And Chair Crandall?
Here. The first item 4 is special orders of business, and we have none. We do have minutes to approve, the revised draft minutes from the adjourned regular meeting of the Planning Commission of September 19th, 2018. Do we have any corrections or a motion?
So moved if there are no corrections. So moved if there are no corrections.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Passes 7-0. Then we have the minutes from the adjourned regular meeting of the Planning Commission of October 3rd. Do we have a motion or revisions?
Make a motion to approve those minutes.
Do we have a second? Second by Wu. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 7-0. Oral and written communications. Members of the audience may address the commission on matters of public interest which pertain to the city and are not otherwise on the agenda. If you wish to speak, please step forward to the microphone, state your name and city of residence, and make your presentation. Please limit your presentation to 3 minutes. This is for items that are not on the agenda this evening. Do we have anyone who wishes to speak? Seeing none, we will close that. The consent calendar, we have no items on that. The public hearing process includes a staff presentation. Well, actually, let's do a quick comment before we start that. This is Sherry Vanderdusen's last evening with us. She's been serving as the interim city planner, and I personally want to thank her and give anybody the opportunity to also thank her. She stepped into a tough situation and did it extremely well and came up to speed very quickly, and I want to thank you publicly for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I appreciate it. I know you came in, you stepped in, and your job was to be a bridge, and we really appreciate that. It was a kind of a tough spot you were stepping into, and you kept things going very, very smoothly, so I appreciate it.
Okay, we were into public hearing. The public hearing process includes a staff presentation, a presentation by the applicant not to exceed 10 minutes, and public testimony. To facilitate the meeting for all attendees, the public is asked to limit their individual presentations to 3 minutes. Following closure of the public hearing, the Planning Commission will respond to questions raised during the hearing, discuss the issue, and act upon the matter by motion. We have 2 items this evening. The first, 235 Avenida Lobeiro, Unit 101, Appeal STLU 18507 of denial of short-term lodging unit permit number 18357. The staff has requested that this be continued to the November 8th Planning Commission hearing. Do we have a motion?
I'll I'll move we continue this item to the November 8th commission meeting.
I'll second it.
Motion by Rulon, second by Talley. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? The next item is zoning, I should have asked, does anyone wish to speak to that particular item this evening? Seeing none, thank you. Item B, zoning amendment 17043, thrift store ordinance. Veronica, you're in charge.
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Veronica Moronis, Assistant Planner. Before you this evening is a city-initiated zoning amendment to regulate pawnbrokers, secondhand dealers, also known as thrift stores, check cashers, and smoke shops. As stated previously, in October of 2016, City Council initiated the thrift store zoning amendment to address issues related to these uses. There are several of these uses active in the city, and between 1998 and 2016, city staff received approximately 100 complaints related to these uses, such as illegal signage, unpermitted outdoor display, and storage. Staff in city attorney's office researched other cities in Orange County and found that several cities had regulations established for these uses. The proposed ordinance will add definitions for the subject uses as well as associated definitions, establish special use regulations, and restrict the subject uses to the conditional use permit process in select zones. The proposed ordinance would establish definitions for each special use as well as definitions for terms associated with these uses. For example, a definition for smoke shop would be established as well as associated definitions such as tobacco product and e-cigarette. The special use regulations proposed under this ordinance would establish heightened standards surrounding hours of operation, windows and lighting, and require security plans for a business. The proposed ordinance establishes standards restricting density of special uses. In addition to the density requirement, the proposed ordinance establishes a required separation from sensitive uses such as schools, hospitals, parks, and residences. Lastly, the proposed ordinance would require a conditional use permit for the subject uses. The subject uses would be restricted to the commercial and mixed-use zones, as seen on the slide, with the exception of smoke shops, which would be prohibited in the neighborhood commercial 2 and 3 zones due to separation requirements. For similar uses, a 300-foot separation would be required. This would mean a check casher would need to maintain a 300-foot separation from another check casher. All subject uses would have a distance separation from sensitive uses. A 100-foot separation is required for all subject uses except smoke shops, where a 300-foot separation requirement is required. A 300-foot separation is recommended for smoke shops due to the history of smoke shops attracting minors. The figure shown here depicts all commercial and mixed-use zones within the city as shown in red and purple. The black hatching shown on the maps depict the prohibited areas within these zones for these subject uses based on a 100 and 300-foot buffer from sensitive uses. Staff does have larger maps that can be viewed later on in this presentation. Any subject uses that were established legally prior to this ordinance going into effect would be subject to the non-conforming section of the code and allowed to maintain their business operations, but would be limited in expansion. The zoning amendment meets the required findings. The amendment is consistent with the general plan and promotes public health, safety, and welfare by establishing regulations to better address potential negative impacts from pawnbrokers, secondhand dealers, check cashers, and smoke shops. Staff recommends Planning Commission adopt Resolution 18024, recommending the City Council adopt the thrift store ordinance and find the amendment exempt from the requirements of CEQA. And with that, staff's concluding their presentation and available for questions.
We'll open to questions for staff. I have a couple of quick questions. What is the cost of and the time delay for a conditional use permit?
A conditional use permit will require Planning Commission approval, so it's approximately a 5 to 6 month process for the discretionary application depending on the completeness of the application submitted at first review, as well as how long it takes the applicant to resubmit required information. And a conditional use permit requires a deposit. Staff typically asks for anywhere between $2,500 and $5,000 for a deposit of a conditional use permit application.
Okay. And then, can you clarify the second-hand store definition for me? Is there no limit to how much second-hand product or whatever, or is any retail business that sells second-hand goods fall under this ordinance?
So secondhand dealer means a business engaged in the buying, selling, or accepting on consignment of secondhand tangible personal property and other activity as defined in California Business and Professions Code, sections 21626 and 216.5. So if someone is dealing only in the purchase of secondhand wares, this would be applicable.
You say only, but I don't see that in the definition.
Engaged in the buying, selling, or accepting.
So that could just be a sideline of their business, and they would be a thrift store.
If it, staff would.
My concern is, would a store, say like Hobie Sport, who may take on consignment and/or sell used surfboards, be considered a secondhand store and fall under these kind of requirements? Would the watch shops we have on Del Mar, who repair old watches and actually do sell secondhand watches in their stores, if a new store wanted to come in, would they be required to go through this entire process, have that extended time frame and cost for some bad actors that may have brought it to light that this ordinance may be needed?
Can I dovetail on that?
Please.
What about auto dealers that sell used automobiles, right? The reading of that concerns me because it doesn't specifically reference that code section. It seems somewhat ambiguous.
So I'm concerned, and we talked to the California code, and I looked that up, and they left it open that any of these types of stores, even some of our best clothing stores, have a rack with old Hawaiian shirts on them. And this seems like an onerous thing to include them all in this requirement for some bad players. Does the attorney have a clarification for that?
Mr. Chair, I actually have BNP Code Section 21626 open right now, and that's, I think your point is well taken. The definition of secondhand dealer means and includes any person, co-partnership, firm, or corporation whose business includes buying, selling, et cetera. So there could be a potential loophole there where businesses like Hobie or the like are caught up in this definition. So that's something that staff could take a look at. We could further explore.
I'd appreciate it, and I'd want to make sure we could discuss that during the...
If you take a look at page 10 of the proposed resolution, I'm sorry, page 10 of our packet. So it's the definitional section of secondhand dealer. So the text there is means a business engaged in the buying, selling, or accepting on consignment of secondhand tangible personal property and other activities as defined in the California Business Codes. So my concern is that the California Business Code is other activities, but the buying, selling, or accepting on consignment of secondhand tangible personal property stands on its own. That's my statutory...
Yeah, I think that could go both ways. There's no comma there, so you could argue that it applies to the entire thing. I think this certainly could be read that way. I think the take-home here is that this definition should be tightened up in order to avoid pulling in businesses that I don't think are intended by the council to be pulled into this. The watch dealer,
auto dealer,
Hobie, auto dealer, et cetera.
Very good. We'll open for more questions. Commissioner Rulon.
Yes, in your report, you talked about approximately 100 complaints in a certain time frame. Do we know how that compares to other commercial enterprises like convenience stores, apparel stores, taverns, things like that?
Staff did not compare against other types of uses.
Okay, thank you.
To dovetail on that very question, we're going to be asked to make a land use decision based on these. Do we know how many of those complaints were for each different type of use? And/or were they acted on, was action taken by code enforcement, and were there any violations or citations generated by those 100 complaints?
Staff doesn't have that information at this time, but certainly something we can evaluate for and look into.
Okay, thank you.
To follow on that, I'm always leery of somebody complaining or making a, let's just say, a statement that something's occurring without, kind of going through the due process. You can complain a lot of times about something and kind of run up the meter, but I think it's important to understand if it was investigated and if there actually was a valid complaint, let's put it that way.
Okay, Commissioner Wu.
Yes, first, I've got a couple of questions. The first is about the definition of secondhand, which is already covered, so I'm going to wait for later deliberation to talk about that. Regarding the complaints, I think I'd like to know a little more detail about those complaints, categorize them, what type of complaints are them. Some of them are merely complaint and not verified. Some of them complaints resulting to some action. We'd like to see a little more to ascertain the impact of those activities. Another question is, I believe that in light industrial zone, especially in Los Molinos industrial area, consignment centers are already allowed. Maybe some of the second-hand dealer too. Does your proposed restriction conflict with that? Because on page 2, underneath the zones, we're saying the ordinance restricts the use to selected commercial and mixed use zones. So it doesn't mention light industrial area. I understand the specific plan is separate from zoning, but maybe there's some clarification can be done.
So specific plans were not a part of this amendment, and since specific plan language for specific plans in the city say to defer back to the zoning ordinance, if a use isn't called out in their use tables, we would defer to the zoning ordinance. So if the ordinance was adopted and updated, we would defer to these regulations.
Commissioner Blackwell.
Yes, thank you. So required finding B relative to health, safety, welfare, it's more of maybe a granular observation, maybe not even applicable, and maybe legal could weigh in on this. So the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission conducts surveys regularly, and there have been extensive studies on these types of uses and resale of things that items that may not meet current safety standards, like cribs, certain clothing with drawstrings, hair dryers that don't have electrocution protection, that kind of thing. Do we have any involvement, or do we ask for is there any sort of licensing or certification required from that commission to ensure that this operator, maybe a pawnbroker or secondhand store, adhere to? When we're issuing a permit to sell these things, they may be selling things that could be dangerous for people. What sort of oversight is in place to ensure that does not happen? And can we ask for something like that?
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, for each of these uses, there's the first minimum standard that's listed is that the use operate with appropriate state licensing and according to all state and local laws and regulations. We don't get involved, and we can't get involved in those types of regulatory issues, but we do require that they engage in whatever state licensing scheme may exist. There may not be state schemes for some of these uses.
So we do have assurance there would be some measures in place that would protect the consumer?
If there are measures in place, they would be forced to comply with those measures. Otherwise, then they're on their own.
Great, thank you.
Okay, the only last question I would have is on the complaints and actions that have been taken. Are they specifically inside the businesses and related to the business, or is it related to ancillary activities outside the business on the sidewalk and whatnot? So keep that in mind when we get to discussion. Okay, I see no more questions for the staff presentation. We will open it up for public comment, and for those of you who have not done so who wish to speak, there are speaker cards in the back. The green cards, fill them out, and we will just call them in order. You'll have 3 minutes to speak, and we are here to listen to your comments and consider them in any decisions we make. The first one is Jim Glenn.
Good evening, thank you. I'm Jim Glenn. I live at 2712 Via Montezuma, San Clemente. And I was here almost exactly a year ago with Joshua House and a request for the first boarding house permit at 104 Loma Lane, and I think we were the first and only ones to get that so far. And that night we explained how the house has a very symbiotic relationship with La Tienda Thrift Store, which is located at 510 North El Camino Real. And just to answer, I think, Michael's last question, we've had federal inspectors come to the store to make sure that those items that are prohibited for us to resell, that we're not doing it. Cribs, car seats, other stuff like that. So they just randomly come in, and so it's up to us, really primarily, to make sure that we're complying with those laws, which we seek to do as best we can. I guess when I just found out about this just a few days ago, because I was out of the country and I came back and got the notice for the public hearing process. So I was just surprised that secondhand stores, which are really thrift stores, were put in the same categories of check cashing and these other businesses. I'm not saying anything negative about them, but to me, most thrift stores exist to help. They're nonprofits. They're helping somebody in the community. And I believe almost all of them that are located in San Clemente, that's their primary purpose. We help guys in recovery. The bargain box, gives tuitions and scholarships for, girls that are going to college, all the way down. I Hope has theirs. They're all serving, basically, lots of times, residents of the city of San Clemente, which I think is a key thing for us to keep in mind. And going back to, I can't remember who asked the question about, does it include all things, if somebody just buys something and resells it. We have many other shops in San Clemente that come and buy things at our store and then go and resell them at their store in San Clemente. So, I'm not sure exactly how that would work. The draft ordinances, basically, it talked about the increase in crime. If you do the math on those, that's 20 years. That's 5 complaints a year over 20 years. That's really not very many if we want to put it in the context of all the different businesses that have existed in the city over that time. And again, not trying to drop dimes on anybody, but I think if we do the research with the Sheriff's Department, we find that most calls are to 7-Elevens, North Beach, Carl's Jr.'s at the other end of town, and then along the alley that kind of runs all the way down parallel to El Camino Real, and not very many at these local businesses. So then the other thing that I'm kind of confused on is the 100-foot barrier between residents, between the business and the residents for a thrift store. I'm going to say almost everybody that lives around us shops at our store. A lot of them walk there, so I don't quite understand that and what negative impact. Oh, is that 3 minutes already? And we have code enforcement that we've gotten a warning one time for stuff in the back, which we immediately dealt with. And as far as I know, we've been there for 10 years. That was the only complaint we've ever got. Okay. And then last of all, we've paid somewhere between $450,000 and $500,000 in sales taxes in 10 years, which benefits the city
Very
as
good.
well.
And I do want to say, Jim, before you go, that one warning, it was taken care of, nothing else pending,
That's it.
correct?
Yes,
Very
correct.
good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next one is Kathy Manuel.
Good evening. I'm Kathy Manuel. I live in Mission Viejo, but I represent the Bargain Box, which is on the wonderful block, 500 block of North El Camino Real. There's a wonderful group of stores. Many of them are thrift stores in that particular block. Did I say that I represent Assistance League? want to get that plug in.
There you go.
We take a lot of pride in our store, both the interior and the exterior. You mentioned complaints. I think above that, we get so many compliments when people come into the store, and it actually spreads to all the stores on the street. If they come in our store, they probably have gone into the other stores along the 500 block, because there are a lot of stores that take a lot of pride. And we just redecorated our store, getting ready for Christmas, and I want to extend an invitation for you to come into the Bargain Box. That's our main fundraiser for Assistance League. We, I think, earned about $180,000 last year that we gave back to the community, mostly to students in Capistrano Unified School District and to the military base at Camp Pendleton. So I hope you'll come and visit us. We take a lot of pride, and I think the whole block is a place where people come to visit who not only live in San Clemente, but who come from Orange County. We have visitors that come from foreign countries. Every time they come to San Clemente, they want to come to our block. So thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. The next, Theodore Lee.
Hi, my name's Theodore Lee. I live in Aliso Viejo. I own the smoke shop at 508 El Camino Real Inner Limits. I guess my biggest concern, I just got notice of this, is how does it affect me? We've been there for over 15 years. I don't feel we've had many complaints. We employ quite a number of people. We pay a lot of sales tax. And a lot of, cutting of hours, I don't know if that's a retroactive thing. I don't know that I necessarily understand how this works. But that kind of stuff will really affect my business. And, I mean, we could go out of business. It's my livelihood. It could be a terrible thing. It could be a terrible thing for my employees. You know, I just think the way the, stuff we sell, it's now a legal thing. We've never done anything illegal. We don't encourage any illegal activity, never have. And I guess I need more answers about exactly what this means for existing businesses, because I don't necessarily understand.
Can you ask the city planner to respond?
We'll have her respond. Have you ever had a complaint for activity that happened inside your store? Are you
I mean, I've had incidents where I've had to call the sheriff's department.
Oh, that's okay. Okay.
But as far as like a code enforcement incident, maybe a long time ago, but nothing. I think the last thing we have a sign that's lit up, and one of my employees accidentally put on flashing. Okay. And we just took care of it.
So that was handled by code enforcement?
Yeah, that's the only interaction I've ever had. We try to be good stewards to our city, We all live there, all my employees live here too, so, thank you.
Thank you. Kim Anderson?
Good evening, Council. I also own a store along 538 North El Camino Real. It's an upscale women's clothing consignment. Maybe some of your wives shop with me.
I'm sure mine does.
I'm sure. At any rate, I do have a couple of questions, and I think a lot of us are probably wondering in some clarity, does this ordinance mean that you would be closing our stores or asking us to close our stores? And if not, like you would kind of talked about, it's a very gray area, because I can think of Paradise Jewelers on Del Mar, the watch shop, the auto store, the surfboards. A lot of people resale. It is the sign of the times to resale. So one of the things I'd like to know too is, how are you saying that we're so different from a regular retail store, in the sense that we pay our taxes, we provide service to the city, to people here in the city, and so I'm just not clear on that. I don't see a big difference, except for we do take things in and resell them, but some of the stores also buy regular retail and sell it as well within their store. So I just have some concerns. The only issues that I've ever had, I've been there 8 years, is in the surrounding areas. We have a lot of homeless people in the back alley. Probably once a month, there's always an arrest back there. Has nothing to do with our stores. In fact, as store owners, we put up with a lot from the back alley, as a woman, I actually have a concealed gun permit now that my husband required that I get, just because it's so scary when I walk out in the evenings to get in my car, or in the morning to show up early. So I don't know that we're really the issue as much as the San Clemente and the homeless problem is really a lot of the issues that we see. 7-Eleven attracts a lot of type of people that cause trouble. And also we have to deal with those homeless and those people coming into our stores. I had one today. I'm gracious, I'm nice, but you know, I know what they're there for. So that's all. I really hope you don't get rid of I wanted to know also, one of the things that you could address, if I was to sell my business, does that mean that going forward, that the new owner could not buy my business? So am I stuck because of the ordinance after 8 years if I really wanted to sell it? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Adam Cloders?
Yeah.
And friend.
Good evening. So Thomas and I both own Consignment Design Concepts in San Clemente, and we've been there for 11 years. And when we took over that building, it had been vacant for almost a year. Nothing had gone in there. All the windows had been busted out of it. And when we first opened that shop, there was nothing but prostitution. There was drug dealers. There's been stabbings in that back alley. And it wasn't until we installed security cameras that have night vision on them that all that activity seemed to stop. There are still some people that do cause trouble, but it's nothing like what it used to be. My concern, I would have to agree with Kim, is if we decided to sell our business, how does this ordinance affect us in that are we not going to be able to sell our business because then the city's not going to give them the permits that they need to operate the business? It really seems kind of prejudiced. I mean, I don't want to talk bad about other businesses, but we're not a check cashing business. We're not a smoke shop. In fact, we're hiring Thrift. And to the point of some of the other people that have spoken, we have people that fly in from all over the country, and their first stop is San Clemente so that they can shop the secondhand stores within the 500 block. We have people from out of state that come scheduled routinely every year that bring not only by them shopping at our store, but they stay at the hotels in San Clemente, they eat in the restaurants in San Clemente. We all bring more business than just our own to San Clemente. If I truly feel that had Kim Anderson, Thomas and myself, the Bargain Box, and even FAM had not gone in and opened up business in the 500 block, it would still be a ghetto. And that may be the wrong choice of words, but 11 years ago, you couldn't walk down that alley without being worried that you were going to get knifed or shot. And we call the police department, and the police department always tells us there's nothing that they can do. So it's not when there are issues that arise that aren't because of our businesses, the police department won't even help. They constantly tell us we're understaffed, or they won't arrest somebody because they're not allowed to. They always have an excuse why they can't do their job. We've even asked for increased patrols through the alley at night, to the point that myself, my partner, we get up 11 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the morning and drive down the alley to make sure that our business isn't being vandalized. The city has fined us for hosing down the alley because
the homeless defecate and urinate at the back doors. It's disgusting. And the city won't come clean it up. We have to clean it up. And I'm not about every day to go out there with a broom and clean up human waste.
Great. Thank you, Adam. I'll wait for discussion on that question. Pat Serrano?
Good evening. My name is Patricia Serrano, and I volunteer at Coral Thrift, and just recently I've been put on the board. So I'm reflecting thoughts about what you want to do and how it's going to affect Coral. If you don't know, Coral's been in existence 54 years at that location. It's the 500 block of North Camino El Camino Real. And so after we got the notice that you were having this meeting tonight, we got to thinking that, well, for one thing, I'm wondering, why is it called a thrift shop ordinance? I mean, it's supposed to be about 4 different categories, but thrift shop, I don't know how that arrived to. But one thing that really just pops out when you were talking about the cost of a conditional use permit costing between $2,500 and $5,000, that's a whole lot of money, especially for a nonprofit. And we give a lot of money for scholarships to Boys and Girls Club and some other organizations, and that would really it would hinder us on a lot of fronts. So what I'm wondering is, we need clarification on thrift shops, because we are strictly nonprofit. We don't buy, we sell. And it's all by donation, and it's all by volunteers. So I just wanted to voice my concerns, and I think that's about all I have. I think it's well recognized in San Clemente who we are. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. J.P. Spitz?
Could I pass for later?
We have 2 more. You won't be much later.
Okay, that's fine.
Terry R. Dahlm?
Hello, I'm Terry Dahm. I've owned businesses in this town since 1971. I am involved indirectly in a lot of the thrift stores and with the community service, with the churches and so forth in this town. I think that we really need to look at the clarifications that are being proposed by staff right now as to the questions that have been brought up before. One, what about their existing businesses and what happens when they sell them? That's extremely valid. I have a business that's almost 50 years old, and we faced this potential problem years ago in 1985 when the city was trying to rezone my property. So I am very, very concerned about that. I'm also concerned about, again, why they're naming this a thrift store ordinance instead of another title. Why is it specifically saying thrift store? And and I'm not a lawyer, but I think the law says that anything that most stores buy, whether it's new or used, is bought and resold. Okay, well, is it a reselling or is it a used? What is the definition there of a thrift store? Is it just used? Is it new? Is it a combination of both? Like you said, the car dealerships, Hobies, my business sells used equipment, new equipment, this kind of thing. So I think there needs to be a lot of clarification, and there also needs to be some real foresight in looking at the distances that we're calling out between the shops. Is that going to affect the existing ones that are in business right now? The 300-foot, the 100-foot, and so forth and so on? Or is that going to be strictly for new businesses? I think that has to be looked at real carefully. So I know you guys and girls in your infinite wisdom will take all of these things under consideration, but it concerns me that people that have had businesses for 15, 20, 30 years have a fear of not being able to pass those down, sell them, or whatever. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Kate Dahm?
Hello, Katie Dahm and the other half of Terry. So we live down at T Street, and I'm confused about this entire thing as to why it's even being brought up. It seems discriminatory to me that this class of legal business would be called out to be handled in a manner separately from other retail facilities. And with the number of lost lawsuits that the city of San Clemente has gone through recently, I think we need to be extremely careful about doing any sort of ordinance that could be considered discriminatory and could be challenged. Secondly, I think, I'm guessing because there's a great confusion as to why all this arose, but that the misguided belief is that somehow these stores attract vagrancy. Well, I got to tell you, T Street attracts vagrancy. So what are you going to blame that on? The parking lot? The beach? Okay, so we have people urinating on T Street. The problem is there's not enough enforcement of the laws that we should be having in this city. And it's rampant. I have the same issues that our neighbor that lives in the ghetto there said he has with the defecation on the street, the urination. It's not dealt with. If you ask the police about it, they don't have time. In my opinion, that's the issue that San Clemente needs to deal with, not thrift stores. Everyone I know shops at thrift stores. Everyone else I know, if they don't, drop stuff off at thrift stores and find it to be an asset. Also, I had to step over someone the other day to get into Starbucks. Is that Starbucks' fault? Should we close Starbucks? You know, so I really think this needs to be looked at because we don't want to intimate something that's not accurate, which is, I believe what's being intimated is that this is a bad seed, and I don't believe that's accurate.
Thank you, Kate. And our last card, if anyone else has a desire to speak, please fill out a card. J.P. Spitz.
Thank you. My name is J.P. Spitz. I've been in San Clemente since 1964. Been a barber and a pastor for years, and this is very, very emotional for me. And I believe that it all started 2 years ago. 2 years ago, I went into the planning department and I said, I would like to open up a thrift store. Incidentally, I've started 3 thrift stores here. La Tienda thrift store with Jim, Kathy's House thrift store, and the thrift store in Capo Beach. And I said, I would like to know if I could put in a thrift store in Baker Square building. I had signed a lease, and that's all I said. The lady looked at it and said, yes, it's zoned commercial, you can. And then, so I made preparation. And then I found out that there was a council meeting that following Wednesday, and Kathy Ward said, Kathy's House, that's the name of our thrift store in Capistrano Beach, wants to open up a thrift store, and we need to stop it, and we need to put a moratorium on thrift stores. Hence the name, thrift store. That's when it started. You can look up YouTube, and it's on there. That's how I found out. And so this is very emotional because you see these men back here? These men, many of them, came from the streets of San Clemente. The thrift store that we have takes them in and puts them into a 1-year Christian discipleship program. So now we had 2 guys, homeless, from San Clemente, and we took them to Elsinore. We have a ranch out in Elsinore. And the underlying thing of this is to stop the homeless. It has nothing to do with the thrift stores, but the thrift stores are critical. These men wouldn't be sitting here if we didn't have La Tienda thrift store. And I spent a long time at the city, And yes, if a thrift store closes, there'll never be another one. If you sell your store, there'll never be another consignment store. I went through the whole thing at the planning department. And this is very serious. And I think that if this goes through, you're going to be killing the goose that laid the golden egg. We are a support to the city. We care about this city, and we love this city, and we want to change it. And putting moratoriums on these stores is not right. It's just not right. Thank you very much for your
Thank you very much. One last excuse me?
Yeah, I should have had a card.
I did not see it. Come on up and, oh, maybe we found it. Shannon Quarrel?
No, I'm going to pass.
You're going to pass? Just fill out a card when you're done and tell us who you are and what city you're with.
I'm Thomas Kennan, and we own Consignment Design Concepts here on 528 North El Camino Real. Reading over your zoning amendment, you know, it's sad that you would put a smoke shop and a pawnbroker in the same category as a secondhand merchandise. It's two different categories. Our street has been mentioned in publications as the Rodeo Drive of secondhand stores. It's not secondhand stores that increase crime and the sale of illegal drugs, and it is in fact the San Clemente farmed out. I get nervous when I get up here and talk.
No problem.
San Clemente farming out their police department to Orange County Sheriff's Department. We have no police presence in the city to control the homeless and the sale of illegal drugs. To have only 100 complaints in 20 years is minimum to only 5 a year, or about 5 a year. Our customers consist of designers, decorators from all over SoCal, and we have customers that come in daily that's from out of state, and so this is the first store that they come to when they come to town. We have numerous customers that load U-Hauls to take out of state as well as in-state. Our operations have enhanced San Clemente and brought lots of tax dollars. Our city should be happy that we are promoting a green city, and we were repurposing items from our city's residents. Our streets have become a destination for busloads to come and shop our stores. So please rewrite the zoning amendment and take out secondhand shops from pawnbrokers and smoke shops and from your zoning. And it also says you have to be 300 feet away from a secondhand store, and this is not possible. To have secondhand stores together is what brings customers to town. Other cities with zoning, you know, for other cities with zoning is for pawn shops and smoke shops, and it's not for secondhand stores, you know, put into one category. So that's kind of what I have to say.
Thank you very much. Make sure you fill out a card so we have it for the... Okay, if you can find it in there. I didn't find it. One more?
Hi, Mary Purdue. I'm with Family Assistance Ministries. We're the new kids on the 500 block. It was a dream of ours to be able to generate income to take care of our programs and the people that we serve. By having a thrift store, we looked and looked and looked and finally landed on the old I Hope thrift store. It's been a godsend for us, generating a lot of income. We have the wonderful, amazing Nancy Leland, who ran Toby's House for years, and also Assistance League shop for very many years. We have people that come in from LA to shop to buy some of our product. We have people that donate brand new clothing to our shop because they know it'll help generate income. And I have people that tell us they know we have a free boutique at our warehouse in San Clemente, but they want some of the items that they paid so much money for to go to a resale shop because they know it'll generate a lot of income to help our programs. So I just wanted to say and confess, mea culpa, we did have a complaint. We had a flashing sign at night. We didn't realize that was not legal, so we fixed that. Nancy stomped on it and broke it. So it'll never happen again. But we're all good neighbors. We all watch out for each other. We all want nothing more than to have our shops be first class and follow the rules and want to do what we can to help people in this town. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else choose to speak? We will close the public presentation. I do want to thank everyone who spoke tonight. You did a great job, and thank you for what you do for the underprivileged, also with your thrift store businesses. We will open it for public comment. Before we start, Veronica, there were a number of questions that were raised, and first, how does this affect existing stores, and would you explain the non-conforming parts of the code?
So any business that was legally established prior to an effect of an ordinance going forward, so such as this one, would be subject to our non-conforming section of the zoning ordinance. Section 17.72, there's a section that regulates non-conforming uses, and in this case, as long as it was legally established, they would be able to continue to operate, assuming they don't allow for anything up to a 1-year lapse in their operations. So if a business owner was legally established prior to this ordinance and they wanted to sell their business, they would be able to sell it as long as the license did not lapse for more than a year. They're also restricted to, they cannot expand their use if it's a prohibited non-conforming use, so they wouldn't be able to intensify the use, change their hours of operation, expand gross square footage, things of that nature.
Okay, and can you explain to me how regular retail stores are different from a thrift store, other than the way they may have their products delivered to the store?
I would defer to City Attorney.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, that's really a policy determination for the Commission. I mean, they're different in that one sells new goods and one sells repurposed goods. They both take in cash in exchange for the sale of goods. I don't have the ability, and it's beyond my pay grade, to differentiate between those two uses.
That was a punt.
That was certainly a punt.
Talk about pay grades now.
Very good. That bothered me from the get-go, and I don't want to put you on the spot. You were given an assignment to do, and you did it admirably as far as coming up with this. We are here just to determine a land use, and this needs to be based on land use. And if we can't find that these land uses warrant the restrictions that are shown in this, we need to say so. And we will open it for discussion.
So thank you all for coming tonight. I certainly appreciate the comments. I'm one of those people that have given stuff, and my wife is the primary one that's arranged that to FAM. So I'm glad to see that that's helping to hopefully generate some revenue for the fine activities that you do. So when I look at an ordinance like this or a resolution like this, I'm reminded of like my first couple of days in constitutional law when we talked about compelling state interests and trying to protect public safety and to do things that we have a vested interest in doing. And I think I have a policy problem with making the findings that are discussed here when we include the secondhand dealers. I bought something from Amazon the other day that was brand new. I bought something from Amazon that was used. It was delivered to my house via UPS next day for free. And I think that if we make a decision that we're going to treat people that sell something new and sell something used differently, we're walking into waters that I don't feel comfortable walking in. I think the other activities that we discuss in this ordinance, specifically the check cashers, pawnbrokers, and smoker tobacco shops, I think we have compelling interest for separations. I think we have compelling interest for separations from some of these certain sensitive areas. And I like the idea of expanding some of the definitions that we have for smoker tobacco shops and the accessory sale use. I think some of those make sense and are modernizations, but I don't believe that the secondhand dealer language in here is part of the same concern that I would share, and even in the same category of uses that we need to be concerned with. So I could not support this ordinance with that in there. I could support this ordinance with secondhand dealer language removed, and obviously we'd need to rename the ordinance. But I think that's my position.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Rulon.
Thank you. I mean, we make a lot of decisions about land use, and I mean, it's an important thing to do as businesses change, or we see something about a business, we need to address it in the community. But I think I'm struggling with this, as some of the other commissioners are, because I'm wondering what are we getting out of this, at least in terms of the thrift stores. We're looking at 100 complaints. I don't see a comparison really of other types of businesses and how this is better or worse than that. I think there's sort of an instinctual thing that there's maybe some other types of businesses that are listed here that maybe they might have problems, but again, where's the evidence for it? The instinct probably isn't good enough to make a land use decision. I do think it's pretty clear that we have to either remove or redefine what a thrift shop means within the context of this. When I'm looking at the findings, I can't make finding Bs that it's not going to not adversely affect the public health, safety, and welfare. I think it could affect the welfare if we get rid of some of these thrift stores and some of the good that they're doing. So, I couldn't support it for thrift stores for that reason. I think also, for what you were saying a little earlier, maybe we need to define consignment as an ancillary use as opposed to consignment as a primary use, for so that selling something at the hobby store isn't the same as a pawn shop, something like that. That might address some of the concerns about some of these stores that maybe have one rack of some product. So that may be worth thinking about as well. I'm wondering too, and this was something that the City Council directed us to about 2 years ago, and I know staff is very busy and things go into the queue, so it's been a little while. So I'm wondering if maybe we also want to get some, because we were directed to look at this by City Council. I wonder if, besides all these other things we might want to do, we might also want to ask City Council for some clarification. Like what are the problems that we have in the city that we're looking to solve by this land use change? Is there a crime element, and if so, let's take a look at the numbers and see what we can do. And I kind of like the 100-yard and 100-foot and 300-foot numbers, but I'd also like to make sure we're applying that in a way that's actually going to solve the problem. So that's probably something worded a little better than that, but something that we maybe can get a little clarification from City Council in terms of what they want to derive from this ordinance and this land use change. So I would say, obviously I can't support the whole thing as it stands right now, but I could certainly support continuing it and looking to change some things and perhaps getting some clarification from City Council.
Okay, Commissioner Wu.
Well, first of all, I'd like to see a little analysis of the data specifics to establish a correlation between the well-known illicit activities on the alley and the business on the street front. Maybe there's some correlation, but we're not sure. And secondly, if we establish that those businesses attract the vagrants, then I think before we put a blanket restriction on those businesses, the city ought to study the other options to how to tackle this problem. And certainly enforcement is one way. Lots of people talk about public safety in this city. Maybe it's because of a lack of peace officers. So that could be a possible solution. I see 100 complaints here, and they're all grouped together. It's just not specific enough for me to conclude that restricting those business is a mature solution at this moment. For the second-hand dealer definition, certainly there are many types of business. For example, we already mentioned a few of them, such as a watch, auto dealer, and then we have antique, collectibles, coins, stamp, and jewelry, and vintage clothing. And they are selling second-hand goods, but I see little connection between those stores and the homeless issues, And finally, back to thrift stores. I believe thrift stores extend the usable life of many things, and helps the living here more affordable, and prevent those goods to go to landfill. It's really not a bad thing to reuse those stuff. I buy things from Amazon. I buy used stuff from eBay from time to time, and living frugally is not a thing. It's not a bad thing. I don't think we, at this moment, we want to limit a thrift store. Before I see a strong correlation between the operation of a thrift store and the vagrant activities, and only if that's the last possible solution, then I will support the consideration of limiting those stores. I do support the restriction on other type of business, for example, check cashers and pawn brokers, and smoke or tobacco shops. So I'd like this item to be continued for the staff to get a little better information and come back with some revision.
Commissioner Kozinski.
Yes, I too would support this if secondhand dealers would be removed or continued for further discussion. I think the problems that the city's trying to address here is the donations left outside the business, the merchandise being on display outside. There may be another way of addressing those problems rather than singling out secondhand dealers. So as it stands, I would support this resolution if we removed the secondhand dealers, or if we postponed it for later discussions to tighten that up.
You want to take a straw vote? In a minute. Are you done? Yeah, I'd like to say that there's, we're here to make a decision based on public comment and facts presented before us, and data that relates to the ordinance. And I really feel there's a lack of evidence showing why we're doing certain things to these uses. There have been complaints, great. So why do the windows have to be open? Why are we restricting hours? There's no justification that we can base our decision on. So I think just because of lack of evidence, I couldn't support it. But I think for all but the thrift stores, there is good cause to have an ordinance, but have it justified and really done more thoroughly and correctly. So how we get there, we could continue it and give direction to staff to rewrite it and gather additional information, which is probably the best way, rather than going with a no vote on it and stopping the process completely. I think there is a process that needs to be completed here. So do we have a motion, or my feeling is we have a pretty good consensus, so a straw vote I don't think is necessary.
Point of
Please,
question.
I would
So-
appreciate it.
So normally when we have these, we have, if you vote yes, this occurs, if you vote no, what the policy is. What are our options?
Please.
Well, the commission can follow staff's recommendation and simply approve the ordinance as drafted. The commission can approve the ordinance with any revisions the commission chooses to make. For example, what's being discussed now is pulling out all references to secondhand dealers. Of course, both of those options would not be to adopt the ordinance. It would be to recommend adoption of the ordinance, either as it's presented or as revised by the commission to the council. Right? It has to go to the council at some point. The commission could vote no. The commission could continue this with direction to staff to come back with facts to support the health, safety, and welfare finding, which is really what we're kind of high-centered on. Or the commission could discuss the kinds of secondary effects that are problematic with regard to pawnbrokers, smoke and tobacco shops, and what's the third one?
Check cashers.
Check cashers, thank you, audience, appreciate it. And direct staff to include those impacts in the finding resolution that goes up to the council. Where this really hits the road is at the council level.
So what is so council directs planning, and I'm sorry for going through this, but council directs planning or the planning department to prepare a resolution for this body. The council can't adopt a ordinance on land use until it goes through this body, is that correct?
That's correct. You have to give a recommendation to the council.
But if we give a no recommendation to the council,
They can still approve
pull it up.
That's correct. It still goes there.
What if we, do we have to take action on this tonight?
Not tonight. At some point, this does not go to the council until action is taken. So it could be taken next meeting or in March. But in order for it to go to the council for final adoption, there has to be some action, a yes or a no vote taken.
Do we have to make a motion to table it?
If you want to continue this to a date certain, with the notice not having to be remade, which is costly, then you have to make a motion to do that. Otherwise, you could just let this die if you wanted to.
Just let it die.
We could.
You could.
Without making a no vote that can get pulled up.
You could certainly do that.
And that's just no action is taken.
It's odd. Procedurally, that's very odd.
But it's perfectly legal.
It's legal.
And then my concern is that something gets done and notice isn't given. I want to make sure that it is re-noticed up so people know about it. So if we take no action and staff decides to bring this back to us, notice will be given again so we can make sure that the public is engaged.
This item at any time would require a public hearing, and that would have to be noticed, and everybody would get notice again at the public hearing.
Were you going to say something, Ken?
I was going to just make, yes, I do have a comment, if I may.
Okay. This is, I think, a pretty important issue, and the cost of re-noticing may be a good investment for the city to do it right and have everything done correctly. So I wouldn't let the economics of noticing it alter our decision. We should make our decision right and let the economics fall where they may. So do we have a motion?
I think.
Or more discussion, okay.
I do want to make a comment, just to jump on the coattails of legal's statement, in that if, we're addressing really the behavior, right? So it's here for a reason. There's clearly been concern over the use or the types of activity that's caused by these uses, which I would agree tend to be retail-esque in nature for the most part. There's exchange of goods for a price and not to be any different than any other. So I'm on board with that. So this does come back, I think it would be great to have some discussion about possible standard conditions to maybe address special conditions for those uses that could, in effect, address the concerns that are attached. So when there's some research, more research done into the origins of the request for this to come to us, that those issues be identified and we can discuss those specific issues. That's the information that we've talked about here at the dais that's missing from the discussion. So when we have that discussion, we can then consider special conditions that could be placed on these types of uses when permits do come through.
Yeah, I think we'd have a better handle on, I don't want to, this is a land use issue.
Right.
We're not trying to exclude any group or anything from frequenting these areas or the businesses. So I think it would be fine to look at those issues and justification if we can get it for all of them. I think it's easy to make the land use decisions for controlled substances being separated from schools and whatnot. No problem there. I don't think it even affects the representative here tonight. The distances, well, if thrift stores aren't in there, the distance is a mute issue on that item. So we have one more comment from Commissioner Wu.
Sherry, if we decide to continue this item, what is the earliest time we can have it?
We would need at least a month to make revisions. The packets for your next meeting would be going out immediately, so it would need to be continued for at least a month.
Okay, well, I'd like to make a motion. So what the date, can you tell me what the date of the next available meeting? Or just to say future?
Sure, just a moment. No, if you continue to a date certain, then we wouldn't be doing new noticing unless you specifically directed the city to do that. Or you could table it and ask us to bring it back when we feel that we've satisfactorily responded to all of your concerns and been able to put something together. And at that point, the staff could schedule it for Planning Commission review.
What is the next available meeting date?
Just one moment, I have that.
So 1 month from now would be approximately the 21st, it's canceled.
Yeah. That meeting has
The
been.
day before my 24th wedding anniversary, so it's canceled for me.
Exactly. Commissioner Talley asked us to cancel that meeting, so so you'd be looking at a hearing date in December, and that would be December 5th or December 19th.
Does December 5th give staff enough time to come back?
Staff seems to think that's a little quick. And let's do this right. Let's make sure they have plenty of time to address this issue.
Chairman and members of the commission, Carl Steele, Long Range Planning, I'd prefer to have time to work on this and take everything we've heard tonight and really spend some time to work with the stakeholders and really bring it back in enough time. So I can't pick a date certain. I prefer to just have it returned to staff.
Can we just not rule on it then, and then you can initiate it?
No.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, if we're going to not rule, the ideal approach is just to table it.
Okay.
Indefinitely, have staff go back and look at it. When staff is ready, they'll come back, renotice it. That could be next year sometime. But so it's procedurally appropriate, then just table it.
Okay. Do we have a motion to that order?
Well, I just want to clarify to make sure we're all on the same page, at least from my understanding. Are we talking about, one thing we want staff to do is to either remove or redefine thrift shop?
I'm for remove.
I'm for remove.
All right, I'm good with remove too, okay. Do we want the staff to include a description of ancillary use of any of these things? So if, say, someone is selling smoke shop accessories, but they're really a different type of store, they might not be covered by this, things like that?
I think it's already addressed.
It's addressed in there.
Well, that's right, there was some percentage thing. So, and then the other thing would be just to have more information on there in terms of the motivation, why make this land use change? Is there, are there certain complaints for certain types of businesses that are more than others, things like that?
That's the special conditions.
I think they've got their, I think
I
they've
think
heard
they
the
got their
comments.
walk- okay,
You-
good.
you-
Walking orders.
Well,
They
if
can
I
always
were to
watch the
make,
tape.
if I were to make a motion, I would not ask the staff to eliminate the second hand at this moment, because I think they need to do some study and show let the facts to show.
I think we've seen the facts.
I concur. We don't get applause very often.
So if you don't, who'd like to make a
I'll
motion?
make a motion.
Okay.
I'd like to make a motion to table this for return if and when the staff feels it's necessary to a date uncertain, with guidance from this commission that the reference to secondhand and/or thrift shops be eliminated.
Do we have a second? Seconded by Rulen. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Did it pass 7-0? Commissioner Wu? Did you vote? Okay, all in favor? 7-0.
6-0.
6-0, excuse me, we only have 6. And thank you to the public for being a part of the process. The next item is new business. And, yes, one moment. Okay.
Is there a moratorium?
No. No.
Okay. The next item is new business. We have standard conditions, and Sherry Vanderdusen is going to present, and we got a handout on this.
You guys didn't catch on when I was talking about standard conditions.
Yeah, I did.
Foreshadowing.
I caught the, I was waiting for.
Let's move on.
Well, good evening, Chair, members of the Commission. You may recall having a study session to discuss standard conditions last month, and you provided some feedback to us. The city manager thought it would be helpful to the city council if the Planning Commission actually took a formal action regarding the new process for the standard conditions. So that's why it is on your agenda tonight. And as we discussed at the study session, we involved all the staff in the development review process to evaluate the existing standard conditions, and we've proposed to make certain changes. First, the changes are organized by timing, as you can see in your handout. And by organizing the conditions by timing, we improve the chances that they will all be satisfied appropriately, and it makes it easier in the review process for staff and our applicants when everyone understands what needs to be satisfied when. We're also proposing to add a new condition that requires an applicant to comply with all applicable local and state laws. And if an applicant fails to comply with any of those provisions, the city would have the ability to consider revocation of a conditional use permit if our enforcement actions don't result in compliance. Now, during the study session, there was discussion about whether the city should require compliance with the laws in effect on the date that the application was approved, or if this is something that would carry forward. So if the city were to adopt some new regulations 5 years after we approved a CUP, would the applicant be required to comply? Staff's position is that compliance should be required with the regulations as they are amended and introduced during the life of the business. Now, obviously, if we approve a permit for a new restaurant, we're not going to require them to change the height of the building if we modify the height limit, or we're not going to require them to provide more parking if we change the parking standards. But if we were to adopt new noise regulations, or if the state were to adopt new regulations as they have for fats, oils, and greases, the business would be required to comply with those types of regulations. Also, I'd like to point out that conditions of approval generally supersede code requirements. So let's say that the city, I'm going to use Mal's example, adopted an ordinance that said all bars have to close by 10 p.m. If a bar had a CUP that allowed them to stay open until 1 a.m., the conditions of approval would supersede the code requirement. So they would still be allowed to have a closing time of 1 a.m., even though there is a new ordinance on the books. Okay, we've also generally deleted standard conditions of approval that require compliance with the municipal code. You've seen a lot of those in your time up here. However, the Public Works Director has asked that we retain the conditions of approval that implement provisions of the municipal code that engineering enforces. He has a couple reasons for that. One, he thinks it's an effective way to create a roadmap for the applicants who are developing something new to comply with the city's engineering standards, and they try to write the conditions of approval in a way that's more user-friendly than the code requirements, so they think that it is easier for the applicants to understand what's expected of them. So we have honored his request because the Public Works Department is a very good partner in the development review process in this particular city. We also are going to be introducing more custom conditions when there are certain requirements that need to be satisfied. For instance, right now, if we approve a CUP for a church in an industrial building, there'd be a condition of approval that says you have to get building permits and you have to show the building official how you plan to use the uses of the rooms. Instead, what we're looking at doing is having specific conditions that would require the applicant to make specific improvements to comply with the building code before they would be able to occupy that space. So that would be more direct for the applicant, and it also provides better enforcement options for the city when we're looking at dealing with those types of businesses, where oftentimes we find that those businesses doing those conversions don't fully comply with the building code. Another change that we're asking is to remove the authoritative citations. Back in 2010, the council commissioned a study by Citygate. One of the recommendations of that study was that the standard condition should include authoritative citations so that it was obvious under what authority those conditions were being imposed. Many of them were municipal code requirements, some of them were blamed on the city attorney, and some of them simply said approved by the city council. The staff has tried to carry that forward when writing custom conditions, and really when you're writing a condition about aesthetics or to try to mitigate a potential negative impact, there is no authority. It's the city's police power. So that's been a struggle as well. Finally, the ultimate decision as to whether or not a condition is appropriate and should be applied rests with the approval authority. So in this city, that would be the zoning administrator or the planning commission. So if you thought that staff was overstepping the bounds or the line on imposing a certain condition, you always have the ability to remove that condition from the resolution, much like tonight where you didn't agree with the inclusion of thrift shops in that particular ordinance. So there are checks and balances already in place with respect to how the conditions are imposed, and applicants always have the ability to protest or ask for modification when they're at the public hearing. So for those reasons, we're recommending that the authoritative citations be deleted as well. And then the standard conditions were most recently adopted by the City Council in 2010. And since then, there have been no updates presented to the City Council, but the staff has been modifying those standard conditions and just designating them as non-standard conditions and reapplying them through the cut and paste method in Word. So having to go to the City Council, write a staff report, collect all the conditions, describe the reasons for the conditions, prepare a new resolution, that's been a disincentive to keeping the standard conditions updated. So finally, we're recommending that the City Council allow the Director of Community Development to be the keeper of the standard conditions. And the director would have the ability to maintain and update the standard conditions. There are a lot of benefits to that. Let's say that you all are reviewing an application and you decide that you'd like to tweak the wording of one of the conditions. We can take notes, and the next day we can make the update to the language. Or if you want to add a standard condition, there's been talk about modifying standard conditions for signs and the sign temperature and illumination. Again, we wouldn't need to go to City Council to be able to do that. We would just be able to implement that administratively. So we think that would be an incentive to keeping the standard conditions updated as opposed to just setting them aside and writing custom conditions. So, with all that, we're recommending that you adopt a resolution recommending that the City Council rescind Resolution 1029, which adopts the most recent version of standard conditions, and that you recommend that the City Council authorize staff to promulgate the standard conditions, recommending, of course, that you always get the final say on the applications that come before you. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to respond to them.
One question.
Any questions?
Yeah, one question.
Yes.
On 4.5, noise. It is, I noticed, the pilot and me, Dom's not here, but we're having to demonstrate that the present and projected noise levels include aircraft and helicopter noise. What are we doing with that? Because I'm just curious what that's trying to do.
Oh, I can't speak with authority to the city's general plan. You see, the staff has abandoned me.
Totally did.
In other cities in which I've worked, the general plan noise element did address those sources of noise and indicated there was some long-range modeling that was done. So the noise models included that in the ambient noise levels. So it was a basis.
External or internal?
Well, most of the noise standards that we're concerned about are interior noise levels.
Okay.
You're complying with interior noise standards for residential, but there are some uses that there are exterior noise standards as well, like outdoor living area for residential uses as well. And so there usually in the general plan would be a discussion of those ambient noise levels and how they are factored into the noise calculation.
I get it, I guess.
Frankly, I think this is an old condition that hasn't been updated, and the city hasn't had a lot of developments that have required a noise study. In my discussions with staff, none of the people I talked to could remember reviewing a noise study that would be required under this particular condition. It's all been much more
It
focused.
just jumped out at me, that's all. Thank you for doing this.
Any other questions of Sherry on this?
Yeah.
Are these
Kaczynski.
conditions copy and pasted from the city of Irvine, or have they been rewritten for?
No, the format was taken from the city of Irvine, this is how they organize their conditions, but these conditions were based on the conditions adopted by the city council in 2010. And then Mal helped us update a couple of the conditions, engineering updated a few, building updated a few. But these are not the city of Irvine's conditions. Their conditions look very different.
Very good. Since this is new business, do we need to open it for public comment?
Yes.
I'll open it for public comment. Seeing none, we'll close that discussion. Open discussion. Do we have any additional questions or a motion?
I have questions. Jim had his line on. Yeah.
I was curious,
Commissioner
and this may be an existing, I don't know if this is something that's existing or it's been modified, some of the stuff with the CC&Rs. Is that only for new buildings and new CC&Rs, or if an HOA amends their CC&Rs, they now have to provide this information to the city?
This condition has typically been applied to large residential projects in the past, and it's not been applied retroactively.
Okay, so it's actually when someone's building something, not,
Correct.
20 years later. Or
Correct.
CC&Rs. Okay.
You also see this with condo conversions.
Okay.
That's the smallest level on which you'll see this.
Okay.
Mr. Blackwell.
Makes sense. Okay, so Sherry, you made a comment about, certain conditions not changing, like height of buildings, setbacks, et cetera. How are we really differentiating between those? How would an applicant have any sort of confidence in their project not going through some extreme change later on, which could be detrimental to them? How are we protecting that? What sort of expectation would an applicant have?
Well, frankly, if there's a state law that's in place, like I'll just pick on fats, oils, and grease for restaurants, the state can impose those requirements, whether or not the city agrees with them. It might be expensive, but we couldn't necessarily revoke a conditional use permit for a restaurant because they're not complying with state law. We could take all kinds of other enforcement activities, but we couldn't revoke the CUP because they're not violating the terms of their conditional use permit. So technically, they're still obligated to comply with those laws. Technically, they are also required to comply with noise ordinances. And if the city decides that if the noise ordinance right now allows you to be at 60 decibels for 10 minutes and the city changes it to 55 decibels for 10 minutes, they would have to comply with that as well too. But the enforcement actions that would be open to the city would be the typical enforcement in terms of code enforcement, citations, potential legal action, as opposed to revocation of the conditional use permit if there was no condition on there that addressed noise.
Okay.
If you disagree with me, please jump in.
No, I think that's a great answer. The other thing that I would note is that with regard to building standards and conditions relevant to those standards, there's the concept of vesting that arises from the AVCA decision. So once a property owner receives their permits and takes action on those permits and invests even $1 in that action, they're vested. And so we can't change the law underneath them. You can change things like noise standards, fog standards, et cetera, but when it comes to building standards, they're vested at the level existent when they were approved.
Right. And that's where my concern resides, and I just want to make sure that when there's an application that moves through the process, that the applicant would be totally aware of this, and it would be memorialized somewhere that up front, so they know what they're getting into and what particular areas of concern there might be. And we do plan on having some sort of a mechanism in place to protect the applicant, correct? Rather than just a reference to our code, we're just going to have specific language in their entitlement that says, conditions subject to change, but obviously we'll make it a little more fancy.
Well, the proposed condition is in your packet. It's condition 1.4.
1.4. Okay, so I guess to add to that, could there be something in there or somehow reminding the applicant that these would be subject to change? That the character of their entitlement could actually change over time?
Wait a minute. No, the entitlement doesn't change.
The character of it could.
No. They are expected to comply with all relevant federal, state, and local laws as amended.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just part of being, remember the old ignorance of the law is no excuse, right? These are specific conditions, but regardless of whether they have one condition, no conditions, a million conditions, they're still expected to comply with the law.
I understand that, but in all fairness, an applicant may not be aware that their noise, their sound parameters could change. So they may decide to invest in business because they're going to receive an approval to operate till 12 a.m. And a year later it changes to 10 p.m.
Well, if they receive, remember what you said, if they receive a conditional use permit or they receive a condition that supersedes the law, that takes precedence over a changed circumstance. And if they have permission to stay till 12 that's put into their conditional use, then that supersedes a change in the
city standards,
in the ordinances later on. Now, noise is different.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. But conditions along those.
But you could have all sorts of things that change. You could have any number. Look at what we're talking about here. If you change,
Well, I understand that. With all due respect, I understand that. But would an applicant see this when we create these conditions of approval for folks? It should be easy to understand.
Well, I think it comes down to another thing. There were probably cities that do not have that document. That the only thing in there would be unique conditions to their project only. There wouldn't be any standard conditions. They're just assumed that they've got to do their homework and see which rules apply.
Well, a general understanding also for most.
Well, that's what I'm referring to.
Right, and that's my point.
So we're being overly good to the applicant compared to others.
Right, it's just, all I'm trying to do is have a discussion about 1.4 and expanding that in all fairness so that it's a clear path.
And how would you do that?
By adding a provision that really underlines the fact that this would be subject, that your conditions would be subject to change. Here it says you should apply to all the standards in place. My read on that as an applicant may be, well, yeah, I need to adhere to all the standards in place at the time of my application. And when a determination is made, I'm set.
How about all applicable provisions, as amended, of the San Clemente Municipal Code?
Well, we're not going to be changing conditions. The only body that can do that is you. So if our noise ordinance were to change, it would just be a change in the noise ordinance. And then if we got a complaint, code would be enforcing the current standards in the noise ordinance, which we would do whether or not this condition
Now, if we
was
said
attached.
because of a unique site condition that they could be at 70 decibels, that would continue even if, because we gave them a unique condition, and it wouldn't change with the
They have a vested
changes in the
right.
ordinance. They have a vested right at that point. Thank you. That's the legal verbiage.
If the concern is to put the applicant on notice that the regulations applicable to their entitlement could change over time, right? And you're satisfied with 1.4, it seems like what you're really looking for is a disclaimer that the underlying municipal, state, and federal laws applicable to their project could change over time. And that's what you're looking for, I think.
Thus affecting the particular applicant's project.
Sure. I mean, so if the commission wanted to put a disclaimer in 1.4 that said these laws are subject to change, we could certainly do that, because that's essentially, I think, what we're talking about here.
Yeah. My concern
But the conditions would never change. It's just the application of the laws that could change.
Yeah, and I'm agreeable to that. I'm thinking of this from a perspective that the applicant might have. And boy, my phone would be ringing off the hook for stuff like this. Hey, Mike, I got a letter from the city and, everything's changed. I thought I could do this X, Y, Z, and now I can't. I need help. And that wasn't clear to me in the beginning. So to have something.
Anything in this document can't change.
Yeah,
That's conditions of approval.
Wouldn't that be true even if that 1.4 wasn't in there? If the city changed its ordinances, they would still have to comply with the ordinance. So,
unless there's something in here that supersedes.
right, unless something
There's
supersedes.
language, right, and that's what we'd be talking
But his
about.
question is what if something, his concern is if something changes in the ordinance, now they have to do something differently because of that condition, and it's actually, they would have to do something different even if we didn't have the condition in there. Correct me if I'm wrong, but all the condition does is allow staff or the planning commission to do something with the permit if they don't comply to those things. It gives us
Okay.
more authority.
I think we're in agreement.
It's an
that
additional
it would be
enforcement
fine-
tool.
It would be fine to have something in here that would raise the flag so the applicant understands it. That's all we're looking for. And we can direct staff to, and the city attorney, if he agrees with the language he just gave us, that's fine, and we put that in there, put them on notice. Commissioner Wu?
I got a question on that issue. Mel, conditions in the CUP does not lock the regulations at the time of approval, does it? It's like development agreement will lock it, but the CUP doesn't.
It's not locked at approval, it's locked when the entitlement is vested. And that requires some kind of investment into the entitlement. So the approval isn't the vesting action, it's taking action, it's the property owner, the applicant taking action on the approval that vests the entitlement.
Okay.
Commissioner Kozinski?
So along the line of the notice for 1.4, if we just put in with all current and future applicable provisions, would that be simple enough to convey that notice?
I see no other lights on. Do we have a
Chair, I
motion?
have a quick question for Sherry. Sherry, if we support this ordinance and authorize the staff to maintain the standard condition, and the standard condition can change, as you said, the director may revise it. Are we going to be informed about any revision?
I don't think the director would have any problem informing you of changes to the standard conditions. So we could Yeah, there's lots of ways we could do that. We could email to you the current versions. We give you a quarterly update on development activity that's going on. We could include it with that report.
Yeah, that would be
I mean, there's lots of ways we could keep you informed.
Because knowing those are standard conditions, we may not pay enough attention to them.
Of course.
Just so if there's any change, we'd like to know it.
I think Cecilia would not mind at all me committing her to advise you whenever the conditions are updated.
Then another question is, in light of keep our regulation and the government's more transparent and friendly to people, I understand the Director of Public Works wants to maintain those citations. Don't you agree that keeping them will help?
My original recommendation was that we not include code requirements as conditions of approval. The Public Works Director disagreed, explained his position, and again, because Public Works is an important component of the development process, we decided that we would accede to his desire to maintain those conditions. Certainly, the Planning Commission could remove those conditions when you're approving applications that come before you if you don't want to include them.
Remove them here for forwarding to the City Council?
You certainly could.
No, my inclination is that for the purpose of making our governments more transparent, we should hold us at a higher standard if possible. So leaving, if it doesn't hurt to leave those citations in place, I would leave them as is.
Okay. I feel we can, I'm comfortable acquiescing to our specialists in the particular subject. If he feels it's important, I'm good with it, doesn't hurt anything. Do we have a motion?
I will move that we adopt resolution number 18-03. I'm sorry, we're through with, did you have one more thing?
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Am I clear on what, are we
I
talking about
apologize.
removing Public Works standard conditions? We're not, we're going to leave them in place, right? Good. We can always address them on a case-by-case as we go through each project, yeah.
So I will move we adopt resolution number 18-030, a resolution of the Planning Commission of the City of San Clemente, California, recommending the City Council rescind resolution number 10-29 and allow the Community Development Department to maintain standard conditions of approval relating to the development review process.
Do we need to make a comment that, as amended, we would be notified
No, I was
by
bringing
staff?
up the comment for the
1.4 as amended.
Quarterly update.
And what exactly did you want on 1.4? The text, the...
As stated by Commissioner Kaczynski, we would include current and future in 1.4.
So with that addition to 1.4, I think with being informed, I don't think that
We'll
we have
just leave
to
that
add that
as
to the
a direction
resolution.
to
We can
staff.
just direct staff to do that.
But I will let the staff report to the City Council will make it clear that we have made that commitment to you.
Great, thank you.
second.
We have a motion and a second. Did you get, yes, Commissioner Talley? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Passes 6-0.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good parting gift.
Okay, we are on to old business. We have none, other than there's some dessert in the back room.
Don't make me take it home, please eat it.
And do we have reports from commissioners and staff? Do we have?
I've got a quick report.
Wonderful.
So at the conclusion of our last planning commission meeting, I went to the traffic engineer's kind of public hearing on a traffic matter that I was interested in. And I don't know if you've been to a traffic engineer hearing, but it is absolutely an example in pitchfork democracy. And I was very, very, very impressed with Tom and how they coalesced order from chaos and how they synthesized a lot of the comments that were there. So it was actually very impressive. So if you haven't gone to one of those meetings, find one and go to it because it's actually, it was very educational.
Yes, we are very gentle.
Yes, that is what I discovered.
Commissioner Wood, did you have a report?
Yes, in October, Coastal Advisory Committee, we had a discussion about a multifamily food scrap diversion program. City signed a memorandum of understanding with a nonprofit organization called Global Green to do a pilot program. What they're going to do is they figure out a way to hire some what they call ambassadors from multifamily apartments, and then maybe they're going to add a specific bin for food scrap so they can put them aside, and they're going to divert those food scraps from the landfill. In the future, I think it's next meeting, we're also going to talk about the renewal and update of Clean Ocean fee. And that fee was authorized many, many years ago, and in 2 years it will sunset. So this will be put on a ballot for the citizens to approve.
Very good. Any others? Okay. Any questions on the future agenda? I think we tabled that one item, so that won't be showing up too soon. So do we have an adjournment motion?
I'll make a motion to adjourn to the next regular meeting of the study session of the Planning Commission on November 8, 2018 at 6:00 p.m. in council chambers located at 100 Avenida, Presidio, San Clemente, California.
Very good. Before we have a second, I will be gone at that meeting, and Jim Rulin will be chairing that meeting. Do we have a second?
Second.
Kaczynski, second. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Passes 6-0.